It began with silence. On the morning of October 17th, 1932, the town of Darlington Falls was supposed to wake up to another ordinary day. But by noon, every single resident was gone. No screams, no signs of struggle, just gone. At the center of town, the school bell kept ringing. No children ran out to meet their parents. The sheriff's office was unlocked, papers scattered across the desk. In the diner, fresh coffee still steamed in the cups, half-eaten pies on the counter. The last confirmed sighting of Darlington Falls people came from a passing delivery driver. He saw a group gathered in the town square, facing the old courthouse. He waved at them, but no one waved back. He said their faces looked vacant. When investigators arrived 3 days later, they found something chilling. Every door in town was unlocked. Personal belongings were untouched. Bank vaults stood open, full of cash. In the mayor's office, a single piece of paper sat on his desk. It was handwritten in neat block letters. "We have gone to join them. Please do not look for us." The mayor's signature was at the bottom, but handwriting experts later said it didn't match his style, and his pen was found in the middle of the street. Rumors spread fast. Some said it was a gas leak from the abandoned mine. Others whispered about a traveling preacher who passed through a week before, promising freedom from the coming storm. An elderly witness from a neighboring town swore he saw a long line of Darlington Falls people walking into the forest at night, carrying lanterns, their heads tilted toward the sky. The forest behind the town was searched for weeks. Nothing was found except strange wooden structures lashed together with rope. They were arranged in perfect circles, each one marked with symbols no one could translate. The deeper the search teams went, the more they reported hearing faint singing. Some refused to go back. By December, the official investigation ended. Darlington Falls was labeled abandoned and wiped from county maps. The buildings were left to rot, vines and moss creeping over them. But those who dared to visit claimed they could still hear the faint echo of the school bell, even though the bell was long gone. The mystery might have ended there, if not for a photograph. In 1947, a hiker exploring 60 miles north of Darlington Falls found an old camera half buried in the dirt. Inside was a single roll of undeveloped film. When processed, the final frame showed something terrifying. Dozens of people standing in the dark, illuminated by firelight. Their eyes were glowing. The hiker turned the photo over to police. It was dismissed as a hoax, but a handwriting note on the back read, "Join us in the hollow when the moon turns red." That phrase matched the strange symbols carved into the wooden structures in the forest, symbols that experts still couldn't translate. In 1954, a journalist named Helen Grayson made it her life's mission to uncover what happened. She interviewed dozens of people who had lived near the town. Many refused to speak. One man finally broke his silence. He claimed the townspeople had been invited to witness something in the woods. He said they followed a sound that no human could make. Helen went into those woods herself. She spent 3 nights camping near the old mine entrance. On the second night, she recorded an eerie, low-frequency hum. The next morning, she was gone. Only her tent and equipment remained. Her recorder captured one last sound before cutting off, a single loud bell. Helen's disappearance brought the story back into the newspapers, but instead of answers, it drew thrill seekers. Dozens went into the forest. Most returned empty-handed. A few didn't return at all. Locals started calling it the Hollow and warned strangers not to stay past sundown. By the late 1970s, the county fenced off the area. Officially, it was due to unstable ground from the abandoned mine. Unofficially, everyone knew it was because the disappearances never stopped. But the school bell, the one no one could find, was still heard on nights when the moon turned red. In 1982, a pair of university geology students illegally entered the hollow to study rock formations. They brought a camcorder. Most of the footage was unremarkable until the final minutes. The camera pointed toward the trees. A faint silhouette stood in the distance, unmoving, its head tilted slowly. Then the tape cut to static. Authorities recovered the camcorder near a creek. No trace of the students was found. The official report labeled it an accident, but the tape's time code stopped at exactly midnight.
Locals claimed that midnight was when the bell calls.
By the 1990s, the Hollow had become an urban legend. Teenagers dared each other to sneak in. Few stayed long. They all told the same story. The forest felt like it was watching them. Some described hearing the faint sound of children laughing, though no children lived within miles.
A local sheriff, tired of the stories, decided to investigate once and for all. He went in with 2 deputies and a search dog. Only the dog returned, hours later, shaking and soaked as if it had swum through icy water. It refused to enter the forest again. In 2003, satellite imagery showed a clearing deep inside the hollow that had never been documented before. A perfect circle, 200 feet wide, where nothing grew. Researchers called it a natural anomaly. The locals knew better. They said it was where the town had stood before it vanished.
Even today, no one can explain what happened to Darlington Falls. Some think it was mass hysteria. Others believe the townspeople willingly walked into the forest and never came back. But there's one detail everyone agrees on. When the wind dies down and the night is silent, you can still hear that bell.
In 2009, a documentary crew entered the Hollow to debunk the legend. They filmed interviews with locals, laughed at the myths, and camped in the clearing overnight. Only one of them returned.
He was found on the roadside at dawn, barefoot, clothes torn, and his voice almost gone. The only thing he could say over and over was, "It's not empty." When asked what he meant, he refused to explain. Police reviewed the crew's last footage. It showed the group laughing around a campfire, then reacting to something off camera. One flashlight beam swung toward the trees. Dozens of pale faces stared back from the darkness. Then the screen went black.
For years, the video leaked online in fragments. Most viewers dismissed it as a hoax, but those who had grown up near Darlington Falls knew the faces. They swore they were seeing their relatives, the ones who had vanished decades before.
The government quietly bought the land in 2015, sealing the area with fencing and warning signs. Environmental hazard, the signs read. Locals knew the fence wasn't to keep people safe. It was to keep something in.
Today, the Hollow remains off-limits, but every year, a few disappear near its borders. Search parties never cross the fence, not because they're afraid of breaking the law, but because they know the law won't protect them from what's inside.
In 2018, a teenager named Caleb live-streamed himself trying to enter the Hollow. His friends egged him on in the comments. The stream showed him squeezing through a gap in the fence, then walking deeper into the mist. The signal cut out after 6 minutes.
2 weeks later, his phone was found in a creek 5 miles away. The footage on it was corrupted, except for one short clip. Caleb was whispering, "I see them. They're not right."
In the background of that clip, voices could be heard. Not human voices. The tone was wrong. The pitch unnatural, like something trying to imitate speech. Audio experts who analyzed it refused to release their findings.
Local hunters report hearing those same voices at night, calling their names from the tree line. Sometimes the voices sound like family members. Sometimes they sound like people who've been dead for years.
Old maps of the area show no town, no hollow, nothing at all. Some researchers believe the settlement itself was never supposed to exist. Maybe it was built in a place where people were never meant to live.
Or maybe it was never built at all. Maybe it's something else wearing the shape of a town, waiting for the next person to wander in and never come back out.
The earliest reference to the Hollow comes from a leather-bound journal dated 1721. It was written by a trapper named Elias Firth, who described a settlement that wasn't there yesterday, but was there today with people who do not look at you directly.
Elias claimed he stayed the night in the Hollow. He wrote about waking up in total silence, as if sound itself had been removed from the air. Even his own breathing made no noise.
When he tried to leave, he found the road he entered on was gone. In its place was a wall of black trees that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them.
By midday, he claimed the people in the hollow began to change. Their faces grew pale, their eyes darker, their mouths slightly too wide when they smiled.
Elias escaped only because he followed a crow that seemed to know the way out. He never returned, but his journal entries were found decades later in an abandoned cabin.
For centuries, locals told stories about travelers vanishing near the hollow's location. The pattern was always the same. They were last seen on the foggy day, heading toward a place no one else could find.
In 1994, a hiker named James Whiteley recorded camcorder footage in the hills east of the hollow's alleged location. The video showed a small town where, according to maps, there should have been nothing but forest.
Buildings appeared intact. Smoke curled from chimneys, but not a single person was visible in the entire 15 minutes of footage. Halfway through, the camera jerks. James whispers that he feels like he's being watched. A shadow passes across the road ahead, too fast to be a person. When investigators later reviewed the tape, they noticed something strange in the background. A figure in old-fashioned clothing stood motionless in an upstairs window for several frames. James left the town quickly, but when he returned the next week with friends, it was gone. Only dense forest remained. No buildings, no roads, no trace it had ever existed. Local authorities claimed the tape was a hoax, but the original recording was confiscated and has never been returned. Only a low-quality copy remains online, sparking debates that continue to this day. The last known eyewitness to come forward was Eleanor Price, an 82-year-old who claimed she was born in the hollow. She spoke softly, almost as if afraid someone might hear. Eleanor described a town that was vibrant in the 1930s. Shops, a school, a church bell that rang every Sunday. But she insisted something happened one night that erased it from maps and memory. She remembered a deep, resonating hum that shook her house awake. Outside, the air shimmered like heat waves, though it was the middle of winter. The next morning, the town was gone. Eleanor woke in a forest clearing, surrounded by strangers in old-fashioned clothes, all equally confused. Within days, men in unmarked trucks arrived. They told the survivors to leave and never speak of what they'd seen. Eleanor never returned. She kept the story to herself until a local journalist recorded her interview in the 1990s. That tape, too, vanished without explanation. By the early 2000s, researchers began piecing together a disturbing pattern. Satellite imagery showed faint outlines of streets deep beneath the forest canopy. One geologist noticed unusual magnetic anomalies centered exactly where the town once stood. The readings spiked at night, then vanished by sunrise. Local legends spoke of the hollow's pulse, a heartbeat-like sound that came from the ground. Some said it was the earth itself. Others believed it was something living beneath. Government documents obtained through leaked files referred to the site as Echo Point. The files were heavily redacted, entire pages blacked out.
One page that remained intact mentioned spatial instability. To physicists, that term hinted at something far more unsettling than a sinkhole or an earthquake.
Some theorized the town had slipped into a parallel dimension, still existing, just not here. If true, it meant the hollow might still be out there, untouched, waiting.
In 2015, a private exploration group received permission to survey the hollow. They arrived with drones, thermal cameras, and ground-penetrating radar. The first drone feed showed nothing unusual, just endless trees. Then, for a brief second, one feed glitched, showing cobblestone streets under heavy mist. The radar scan revealed something stranger. A network of empty spaces, perfectly rectangular, sat just a few feet below the surface. That night, one of the team members reported hearing faint music. It was an old waltz, distorted, as if played underwater. By morning, that same member was gone. No footprints, no signs of struggle, just an abandoned tent and his recorder. The group aborted the mission immediately. The footage and data they collected were never made public. Weeks later, the missing team member's recorder was analyzed. It contained 3 hours of silence, except for one section, a woman's voice whispering coordinates. Those coordinates pointed to an abandoned railway tunnel 50 miles from the hollow. Locals claimed no one had entered it in decades. Inside the tunnel, explorers found rusted tracks and piles of old suitcases. Each suitcase was tagged with the name of a hollow resident. One suitcase was opened. Inside, perfectly preserved, was a newspaper dated the day after the town vanished. The headline read, "Train arrives without passengers." The tunnel ended in a brick wall, but on that wall was a mural. It showed the hollow as it once was, but with no people,
only shadows in the windows.
Those who touched the mural claimed they could hear the waltz again, this time clearer. Some say if you listen long enough, you can hear the voices calling you to join them.
The mural was photographed and archived. Weeks later, the photo developed differently. The shadows had moved closer to the frame's edge. Archivists tried to dismiss it as damage from light exposure. But the next photo showed an empty brick wall. The mural was gone.
After that, the disappearances stopped. But some swear they see Hollow's residents on foggy nights, boarding an invisible train.
The tunnel is sealed now, its entrance buried in rubble. Still, hikers claim they hear the distant sound of a whistle and the waltz fading into the forest. If you ever find yourself near the hollow and hear music in the distance, turn back. Don't follow it. Some doors, once opened, never close again.
Because the train still runs, and it always has room for one more passenger.